everybody wants to be a better communicator. We use communication all the time. What would you say it would be the worst advice that people are commonly told about being an effective communicator?
It's not just one round of bad advice. They tend to get 3 rounds of bad advice. And the first bad advice is thought suppression. So that sounds like, don't think about a pink elephant. And then the second layer of advice is a completely general suggestion that's so general it's inactionable. And then the third layer is a mental reminder for what is the physical activity of speaking. We underestimate how deeply physical speaking is. It takes 120 muscles to turn air into sound and then sound into words. So I'll give you an example and you can see how this plays out. Anyone listening, if you're a fast talker, you're going to relate to this, but you probably, if you're not a fast talker, you know someone in your life who is. Fast talkers, this is how those 3 bits of advice go. First, don't talk too fast. That's the thought suppression, okay? So when you hear don't talk too fast, all that's happening is you're thinking about the thing you're bad at, which is talking too fast, and yourself, you, and all the ways in which you've never learned to speak more slowly. So then your focus is entirely on the person it's not supposed to be from a communication situation. You're thinking about you, not your audience. Then after someone says, don't talk too fast, then you get the totally general thing, which is just slow down. Okay, how? When? In between words? In the length of a word? Between paragraphs? And if just slow down was going to work, it would have worked 30 years ago, the first time you heard it. And then after that, then you get a mental reminder for what is a physical activity. So that sounds like remember to breathe. But remember to breathe would be like telling a golfer or an athlete, remember to, and then you get some sort of instruction about your swing or your form, but not actually doing the thing. This tends to not work at all. And even more discouraging, not only does it not work, what happens is the person who receives all that useless advice tends to feel bad about themselves afterwards because they've not been able to execute the thing they're trying to improve. And then they think, well, something must be wrong with me because I got this really useful, specific advice. And it messes people up royally.
One of the things that I thought, which really amazed me, was that we are constantly having interactions with others from, the moment that we enter the social arena. We're in class, we put our hands up, we go on dates with others, we have conversations with our friends, we text digitally, we have conversations in person, on the phone, we try to convince people that our product's right for them, we sit in interviews. And you would think that with all the practice that we have across the lifespan, that surely that we would become so good at it. And yet when I really think about it, we're not. In a simple way, we very few of us are very good communicators. And that seems like such a paradox. So why is that?
You're right. We do that all day long, but think about something else we do all day long. Map it to any daily behavior. Let's say we walk all day long. Okay. But let's say you have like a tiny injury to your knee or a little bit of a misbalance to your gait or your step. That doesn't get better the more steps you take. Oftentimes it actually gets like slightly exacerbated and it gets worse, actually. So many people, they're good in some aspects of their communication, but they might have 1 or 2 really significant gaps that not only do they not get better, but they just get reinforced and reinforced and reinforced over and over again. And it's part of one of the things I say about this book to people, which I don't think most authors say, you might have never heard an author say it, in fact, is I don't care if you read the book. I love that you did, so thank you for that. I really do. Thank you. But I don't care if you read the book. I care a lot, though, if you read 1 chapter of the book, because I've organized it like a cookbook or a how-to manual. And so you have a chapter on eye contact, a chapter on removing filler language, a chapter on conciseness, gestures, stance, etc. And the idea is that people can find the area in which they know they have some weaknesses or some growth that they could try to embrace, and then use that chapter to get better in whatever area that they have some room for growth in.
One of the things that I found amazing about your story, the book opens where you were kind of whisked away by Andrew Yang's team to help him, for instance, with the political debates. I wonder if you could perhaps give us a kind of a backstory about what happened there.
Yeah, for sure. It's some, in the words of the musical Hamilton, it's the room where it happened. It's some inside talk about how campaigns work. Andrew Yang was, if your viewers don't follow U.S. politics or your listeners don't follow U.S. politics closely, he was running for president in 2020. And his campaign was perhaps one of the most successful long shot campaigns in American politics, period. The Democratic field started with 25 candidates. He was an absolute outsider, and he didn't leave the race until he was the fifth person to leave, the final candidate of color, and by far the most unknown at the beginning. He had a heck of a ride. So the backstory is the first debate, he literally bombed. I mean, bombed. Of all of the candidates, he had the least speaking time. And at one point in the debate, he actually spoke at a rate of speech of 7.2 words per second, which, by the way, I can't even try to replicate that right now. That is so fast, I can't even keep it up. Trust me, that is too fast. Just in context, people tend to speak in like the 2 to 3.5 or 2 to 4 words per second kind of range. So this is almost double the very max speaking speed you want to aim for. Almost double. The next day, the campaign calls me. And they say essentially, can you be in Portland tomorrow? And you're right. So within 36 hours, I fly to Portland, and almost like a prize fighter or something, we spend the next 10 days in exercises and drills, doing all the same stuff that's in the book, all these exercises about rate of speech and vocal variety and conciseness. And then he really turned it around. And for the second debate, he was ranked by virtually the entire media pundit class as a big winner of the debate. His fundraising took off, and it course corrected his whole campaign. Now, that is a little due to me, so I will take a little bit of a victory lap, but, and I mean this with all earnestness, the credit really goes to him. And the reason I say that is because I coach lots and lots of people in the world, and my coaching doesn't change that much day to day, whether I'm coaching a high school student on, their speech they have to give, or a presidential candidate. But what does change a bunch is how willing the person is to risk and to try and to have a growth mindset about improving. And he is the definition of all of those things.
And with Andrew Yang, what were the main things that you worked on with him between that first debate to the second one? I assume, obviously, you mentioned that he was speaking too quickly. What were some of the things that you really drilled home with him between those two?
Yeah. But here's the cool thing. Anyone listening to this, you can get the exact same things I did with Andrew Yang in this book. In fact, the first exercise I introduce about vocal variety is called silent storytelling. And we did that a lot that whole week. Silent storytelling, I'll just give you the quick preview of it. You essentially speak, but without sound. So think of it like being muted, but you're still speaking. So you move your mouth, you lip sync the words, in effect. You move your gestures with freedom and ease. You allow your face to be as expressive as needed to get the ideas across. And then you imagine you're trying to communicate your story, but you're not allowed to make sound. So I won't do that right now because then the listeners won't hear what I'm saying. Hopefully the explanation is clear enough, and you can read it in the chapter on vocal variety. Now, the reason we did this is because rate of speech is just one of the 5 P's of vocal variety. People get all hung up, again, on that very reductive, simple, and useless feedback of just slow down. There's pace, that's speed. There's pitch, that's high and low. There's pause, that's silence. Power is volume, loud and quiet. Placement is the fifth P. That's where the sound is placed in your body. So in a more nasal kind of a placement, more like a throat kind of placement, back of mouth, more of a chest voice, or a blend of all of those placements. Those are the 5 Ps of vocal variety. Speed or pace is just one of them. So to help someone who was speaking at 7.2 words per second, like he was, it's not enough just to try to hammer pace. You actually want to examine all of vocal presence. This exercise, silent storytelling, does that. And you can imagine if you're having to speak to someone without sound, you have to lip sync the words. Instantly imagine how much longer it takes to form those words and to enunciate them clearly enough that someone who is reading your lips might be able to understand what you're saying. And so magically, automatically, it slowed him down, but not by giving all that very reductive thought suppression and general feedback and then mental instructions for a physical activity. It would have just made him worse. So we did exercises like that and like the ones in the book for a week and a half. And the before and after footage is honestly quite shocking from the debate. And again, that's a credit to him. And he is he is such a generous person, in fact, that he will even talk about that. I was on his podcast and we talked about it. We did a deep dive about that very example. And he does that for such an amazing reason, which is he's very open about improvement. He's very open about trying to improve the world, trying to improve society, and even people trying to improve themselves. So he's like the opposite of defensive or guarded about that kind of thing. It's really inspiring.
For a kind of a personal story, where did you learn all these techniques? Because some of the ones, you know, that you go through in the book, the corkscrew technique, you have people do, you know, Lego drills, breathing exercises. You just mentioned some of the, how did you learn all this?
Yeah. So this is fun. Well, you mentioned the cork. Let me just put that one aside for a second, because then I write this in the book. The people who are listening and watching, viewers, listeners, the cork is essentially an impediment activity. You put a cork or some kind of impediment in between your teeth, and just like a sprinter running with a parachute on, or a swimmer swimming with extra baggy swim trunks in the training pool, you make your job more difficult, and it's like fighting past an impediment, and it helps your enunciation. That exercise I can take no credit for. I learned it from the head of voice and speech at the Royal Shakespeare Company in London. Well, doesn't matter. I was in America. He was teaching in America. But point being, I learned it from this guy named Andrew Wade, but he learned it from someone who learned it from someone. And it goes all the way back to the principle, anyway, it goes all the way back to ancient Greece and an orator named Demosthenes. So it has a long historical pedigree. That is not to dismiss it. It's good. People, you should use it and try it. But to answer your question, I did not invent that whatsoever. But what's fun for people who read this book is that all the others I did invent. And the reason I have a degree of confidence about that, I mean, I knew that I invented them, but here's a funny story. So when you're launching a book, you have to put out all this written material. Everywhere you go, you have to send a bio, you have to send an overview, that kind of thing. And because my team, the publishers and others, they use large language models, Chat GPT, generative AI, that kind of thing, to write some of these pieces sometimes. It's an ethical use of the software, so I'm not critiquing it, okay? But one time, they fed the Lego exercise that you read in this book into Chat GPT, and it hallucinated. It spit back this crazy word salad mumbo jumbo that made no sense. It literally didn't know what to do with it. And I found this so exciting and encouraging, like, haha, the robots have not totally won yet, because all the rest of it, my bio, what to expect, what books are typically like, and where to learn more about Michael, all that stuff was really beautifully written. And in fact, better than the initial thing we had submitted. But the Lego drill, it didn't know what to do with it. So these things are invented, and I developed them watching how much communicators struggled and recognizing if I could give them a very simple kinesthetic way to use their bodies to learn, and not just their brains, don't just get stuck in their heads, it transformed how they could learn a skill, learn it very quickly. And so that's why the book is jam-packed with pages to rip out and turn into strips of paper, like I said, or wear a paper crown to work on posture, dots that you spread around the room to work on eye contact, and more.
Before we jump into these specific exercises and take people here, there, and everywhere and get them to become a better communicator, I'd love to know, when you think about the hallmarks of a great communicator, what are the main things that you are actually looking for and that you are actually assessing?
Yeah. Here's a really cool thing, and hopefully the tremendously liberating thing for all of your viewers and listeners. You, whoever you are, listening, watching right now, you are a great communicator when you're truly focused on reaching the other person. Now that sounds so basic, but it really isn't. All of the behaviors that we think of as the behaviors of confidence or good communication, that's eye contact, that's gestural freedom and ease, that's enunciation, that's vocal variety. All of these behaviors, they are outputs that come from needing to reach the other person. So imagine this. You're talking to a friend who's in the midst of a really profound crisis, and you're doing your very best to listen to them and be helpful. I want you to do that thought experiment and see yourself in that situation and notice how you speak at different speeds, how much time you tolerate silence, how earnestly and intently you look at them to try to track what they're going through. You do all of these hallmarks, to use your word, all of these hallmarks of great communication. You do them automatically, and you never even give it a second thought. And then you, whoever you are, you get into a high-stakes communication situation, and it all goes away. So you're giving the big presentation that you're totally freaked out about, or it's the job interview that you're petrified about, or you're at the networking event or the cocktail party, or you're on a date, or whatever it is, and self-consciousness rears its ugly head, and you become totally focused on yourself, and all that goes away. The voice becomes totally monotone, and the enunciation becomes very quick and not dynamic at all, and eye contact becomes totally scattered, and then you stop gesturing whatsoever. You just hold your hands clutched like so, and all of it falls apart. So what I really challenge people to do and to embrace is not some universal ideal of good communication, like, Martin Luther King or Winston Churchill or Oprah Winfrey or whatever other example you might want to look to. No, presence. Presence is you. But you, ironically, when you're at your most other focused, not thinking about yourself one bit. And whatever that looks like for you, that idiosyncratic best, that is what I think people should aim for, is the high watermark they're shooting for.
Right. So when we become too internally focused, when we become self-conscious, that is perhaps our biggest inhibitor to being an effective communicator.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'll answer your question, just flipping it back to you and to the audience. Isn't that the case? Meaning, can't you call to mind right now some situation in which you were like painfully, almost like skin crawlingly self-conscious, or you felt almost an out of body experience because you felt so awkward and strange and nervous in that situation, and you were almost watching yourself from the outside? Yes, that is the death of good communication. The
real main, I guess, takeaway that we'll be discussing here, that we'll build on to everything else, and that is, when we are going into these high stakes situations, interviews, public speakings, we're going on dates, that perhaps that is the mind shift that we need to make.
So yes to the mindset. And sometimes that mindset by itself can actually be all you need to break through that self-consciousness and get more interested in the other person. And so that's just the basics of human listening. Asking good questions, really trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes, really trying to listen with your full attention, not just minimally. Sometimes that mindset works, but other times it doesn't. Other times a mindset is not enough, because when we're really feeling chronically self-conscious and self-focused, it's maddening. It's like the pink elephant, and the more that you feed into that, like, stop thinking about yourself. Stop thinking about yourself. Don't do this. Stop thinking about yourself. Stop. Why are your hands so weird right now? Stop moving your hands about that relentless self-focus. It's really hard to quiet those noises and those mental tapes when they're happening. So that is why I take this deeply physical approach, because the journey is, if the mindset fails you, it might, then the journey is you learn the behaviors that you do when you're at your other focused best. You use kinesthetic exercises to unlock those behaviors. And then you do those behaviors even when you're nervous. And then the miracle is this: you come across well even while you're nervous. It's not your job to not be nervous. It is your job to still communicate even when you're nervous. So you still communicate well when you're nervous, but then the miracle is, by doing that, you slowly tap into being more other focused anyway. So you take on these behaviors, but very quickly it unlocks a virtuous cycle in which you get more interested in the other person. The self-consciousness fades away. The body kicks in and you build muscle memory of navigating even the most fraught situations and doing well.
One of the main things, I guess, that people often think about when it comes to great communication, and I have to confess, I'm the world's worst for this, and I've become so aware of it, and I'm listening to myself speaking, and I really want to address this. It's one of my goals for the year. Fill a language like, kinda, perhaps, literally,
sorta, basically.
You say in the book, of course, that it's not a problem necessarily, but it's a symptom. What is it a symptom of?
Yeah. The book is called Don't Say but I am not the police. I'm not concerned with the occasional What I want people to become very aware of is if their ums or their filler skyrockets in certain situations. So if you have one every 20 seconds when you're just talking to a friend and earnestly trying to help them and figure out what they should do with a given crisis or problem, well, that's fine. But if those ums skyrocket to one every 3 seconds when you're nervous in some sort of situation, that ratio, that's the thing you should try to address, because all those ums are a result of you not actually being focused on the other person, but you just opening your mouth and letting words fly out as fast as you can. So they're a symptom of you, and I don't mean you, I mean the royal you, all of you, us, everyone. They're a symptom of us not being in as much charge of our language as we could be. Not actually committed to the activity of choosing words, thinking about our ideas, and then sharing them. Now, that's easy enough said. I can jump into an exercise if you want to.
Please, let's do it. Let's do it.
So it's easy enough to say that. Okay, it's a symptom, so you just have to think about what you're saying more. No, that's not going to work either. That's that general advice. Like, just think about what you want to say. Because filler, either if it's a symptom that comes out because you're just opening your mouth and letting words fly out, or if it's a habit in certain situations, that is now a physical pattern. It's not just a mental one. So instead, the exercise I teach in the book is what I call finger walking. This is in the chapter on articulateness. And the phrase that I use to describe what this can unlock is linguistic precision, because that's what you want to strive for, being precise with the words that you choose. Now, if people are watching a clip of this, you'll see what I'm doing. If you're just listening, I'll describe it for you, which is I'm walking my fingers forward in space, perhaps along the top of a desk or a table, and I'm choosing each and every single word that comes out of my mouth. You do not need to get too obsessed with, is it syllable by syllable or word by word? What you're trying to do is to walk your ideas across the table. And if you don't know what to say next, take as much time as is needed to allow your fingers to help you choose the next idea. You can even go farther and think of your fingers almost like the feet of a tiny ballerina who is tiptoeing through a field of tulips and trying not to disturb a single tulip. This is called embodied cognition, by the way, people. So it's not just hocus pocus or something. You're using your body to learn and to learn differently. And the activity of walking the fingers forces you to actually consider your words, choose them, and commit to them. And so that's the exercise that I recommend that people try.
There is largely a physical element to being an effective communicator. And I'm not entirely sure that many people would think in that way. People, I guess, they just think that words just blur out of their mouth and they don't consider perhaps the other factors that you considered, the body language, the eye contact, the posture. So I wonder if we can perhaps get into what role our physical presence, how our body is, how in sync our body and the linguistics are. I wonder if we could perhaps get into that connection.
Yeah, sure. It actually is even more dire than you described. So not only do we think it's a thinking activity, which means, okay, if I can just think of the right thoughts, if I can just think of smart stuff, I will say smart stuff. Or if I can just remember to say all the smart ideas I have, then I will say all the smart stuff. Or if I can just make sure I'm faster on my feet and can think of a quip quicker or quickly think of an impressive answer quicker, then I will communicate well. But the problem then is that you're probably not going to. You're probably going to fail in those efforts. And then you're going to double down and say, I just have to get smarter. Okay, that's a long journey, people. Getting better, are you getting smarter? Or building your vocabulary even more, or speeding up your word recall? Those are hard things. So when we don't improve as communicators, when we're putting it in a silo of just being a thinking activity, just cognitive, it actually tends to make us worse because we keep performing badly. We keep yelling at ourselves about not having performed well. Then we double down to try to think harder. Thinking harder doesn't work. We fail again. And you can see this vicious cycle that people can get into. It entirely misses the point. It's not even just body language, like you said. You, again, referencing the royal you, everyone listening, you, me, everybody, you are a communication instrument. You, in fact, are a musical instrument. It's not just body language of having eye contact and using gestures. You have a reed, like a woodwind instrument, like an oboe. You have a reed in your throat. Those are your vocal cords. And they flutter and vibrate like that. When you breathe in, your diaphragm drops down. Your lungs fill with air. That expands your rib cage. If you're standing tall enough for it to do so, your diaphragm drops down enough that it pushes your guts out of the way. Then you expel that air. It flows over your vocal cords. It picks up sound right there. And then that sound amplifies throughout all the chambers of your body, which is why when you plug your nose, your voice sounds different because you're changing the chamber within which the sound can vibrate. That sound amplifies throughout your body. And then we do this miraculous act of gymnastics with our mouth to enunciate. I mean, even saying the word enunciate. Look at what your tongue, jaw, soft palate, lips do to make that word. It takes more than 120 muscles to do this miracle of taking air and turning it into sound and then turning it into words. It is more like a dance or a sport than it is like a memorization activity. But people don't fully comprehend this, and they totally shortchange that side of things. So when people discover this approach, what tends to happen is they get better fast because they've never done it. They've never explored it at all. And all of a sudden, when they've set their body up for success, to breathe, to create sound, to allow that sound to amplify freely and fully in their body and to open their mouth and dynamically move their mouth and their enunciators sufficiently to commit to the words that they're saying, all of a sudden, they unlock a virtuous cycle in which all the brilliant thoughts that they are thinking can actually come out for the first time. So it goes beyond body language. It is using your physical and vocal communication instrument in ways that set you up for success. And if you need help in certain specific areas, that's why I suggest all these kinesthetic tools that can help with freeing up gestures, making enunciation more dynamic, generating better, more organic, more direct eye contact, grounding your feet, and, all the different chapters of the book.
Some things that I'm taking away here is making sure that we are pausing and breathing, using that vocal variety, but also things like maintaining eye contact, having an appropriate body language, and, an appropriate kind of posture. Are they the types of things that we should be thinking about to leverage this virtuous cycle, the term that I love?
Yeah, but I would tweak the final sentence you said, because you said, are they the things we should be thinking about? Yes to all of that, except for I would just remove the word thinking and put in doing. Yeah. And the important thing, people, is that you already know how to do this. You do it automatically when you're really, truly other focused. Posture is a perfect example. Okay. Posture is often taught like one must keep their shoulders back straight and sit up straight for some idea of like the impression you make or etiquette. But posture, partly we stand as tall as we actually do, partly because that gives our diaphragm enough room to drop down and our lungs to fill with air. And if we're behind a desk all day long in a chair crunched over and our lumbar is completely collapsed, you can't do that. So posture is not just about making a good impression. Posture is about literally allowing your body to communicate in the way in which your body wants to communicate. So yes, these are the behaviors we should be doing, but it's not just about thinking. They do unlock a virtuous cycle. And I'm so glad that you latched onto that term. The whole book, as you know, is just focused on delivery. There's not a single chapter that is about like storytelling or how to talk in threes or any other content tool. The entire book is about delivery. And if that distinction is not already clear, I'll make it very, very vivid. If you hold your hands up like you're looking through two giant binoculars and you look at your left hand, you'll see it looks like the letter C, and your right hand like the outer half of a capital D. So that left hand C stands for content. That's the words that you say. The right hand, the outer half of a capital D, that stands for delivery. And that's everything besides the words. How you say it. This book only deals with delivery. And it does so because it is the thing that is wholly neglected in our kind of communication training. But it's also the topic I'm obsessed by because it can unlock, to your point, this very virtuous cycle when the delivery gets better and better and better as these factors compound. And it can even improve the content. So let's go back to the Andrew Yang example for a second. You know what he was really much more able to do when he was speaking at 3.2 words per second rather than 7.2? Say smart stuff. Use smart words. When he was breathing, opening his mouth, enunciating dynamically, he was giving his brain all the stuff it needs to be able to decisively choose the best word in a given moment. I mean, I joke sometimes that your brain needs two things to think of smart stuff. One, time, and two, oxygen. And if you're talking like an out of control train and you never stop, you can't get either one of those two things. So yes, delivery can unlock a virtuous cycle between delivery and content, but delivery even unlocks a virtuous cycle just in the category of delivery. Meaning, if you allow air to come into your body, well, in order to do that, you have to be a little bit taller If you're a little bit taller, your hands don't have to rest on the table all the time. So you may begin to gesture a little bit. As you gesture a little bit, you're probably indicating your audience. So then you might even look at your audience. As you improve eye contact by looking at your audience, well, then you might actually notice what's registering on their face. So your face might become more expressive. As your face becomes more expressive, you probably open your mouth more. That affects your enunciation. So now you're enunciating more dynamically. And when you're enunciating more dynamically, guess what's more likely to happen again? Air is going to come in the body. So it ends up driving in this really amazing virtuous direction that can get people out of a lifetime of bad muscle memory and a lifetime of self-consciousness and even self-loathing and shame.
People might be wondering, just going back to the 5 Ps, about when are the right times to slow down and to breathe? And then when are the right times then to bring these other aspects in about, alternating our pitch or, speeding up, using more power within our voice? How do we kind of balance those two?
This may be a slightly longish answer. Okay. So I give you full permission. You can literally interrupt me mid-word if I get into too much detail. Okay. Or you have a follow-up question. And the reason I say that is because in the book, I actually joke a little bit in the opening paragraph in the chapter on vocal variety. I say, welcome to the longest chapter in the book. But in this case, long does not mean boring. Long means important. But there's a lot to unpack about vocal variety. And typically it is dealt with by people with this totally reductive and inadequate brushing over, in which it's called tone or energy or passion. And vocal variety is actually a tremendously profound thing, and you can address it with lots of rigor. So to get into your question, and then again, please interrupt me midstream if you have a follow-up question or you want me to tweak this in some way. I did not invent vocal variety. Humans have been using it since we've been human. But I did invent this naming system that you can learn about in the chapter to make it alliterative for people and then hopefully easy to remember because of the alliteration. So it's pace, pitch, pause, power, and placement. Again, like we talked about with Andrew Yang. Pace is speed, pitch is high and low, pause is silence, power is volume, and placement means where the sound amplifies in the body. These 5 Ps are deeply interconnected. So you don't even have to worry about trying to focus on which one you're changing. They all change together. And they're really important, really important. It's not about having drama or flair or charisma. We use vocal variety to convey meaning, please pass me the red pen. Okay, so how I said that indicates to you there's a blue pen and also a black pen. You hear that meaning right away. We also use it to convey emotion. In the book, I mentioned if you've ever misread a text message from a friend and thought the friend was furious at you and turns out they weren't, it's because you heard their voice in your head with vocal variety, call me back, as opposed to call me back. That's communicating emotion through vocal variety. We use it to orient our audience giving them a list of priority or chronology or alternative. Do you want this thing or this thing? So now we hear there's 2 different options or choices. And then the most important, we use vocal variety to surprise each other. So our brains are wired to go to sleep all the time because our brains are these super weapons in between our ears, and they burn a tremendous amount of calories when we're using them. So evolutionarily, our bodies are always trying to put our brains to sleep, to save some calories, to run away from the prehistoric predator. So if you give your audience an unending pattern that never changes, what you're inviting their brain to do is to go to sleep. That's why white noise is white noise. Soon you don't hear the fan. You don't even register it because it's a pattern that your brain recognizes will never change. And because it's never going to change, I don't have to pay attention to it. I should pay attention to all the surprises around me, the danger and delight that might be coming. So if you speak in a monotone voice all the time, what you're inviting your audience to do is to ignore you. Those are the purposes of vocal variety. Now, for most people, the goal should be to use more vocal variety. More. Because most of the time, when we're in a stressful situation, what we do is we contract and we go into like a more neutral style of speaking because we have some misguided idea that this is more professional and I should sound professional all the time. So I'm going to speak in a very sober-minded way like this, very conventional, and people will see that I'm trustworthy and serious. That's what we typically do. But I'm not suggesting that vocal variety is always better. One could go too far. And you can think of it on a bell curve. On one side, you have constancy, and on one side, you have chaos. So old, phone call centers, when you would get a voicemail and it would sound like, please press the button at 142 for the connection. That is chaos. And we couldn't make sense of that sort of voice software because it was so chaotic. So vocal variety exists in this sweet spot of coherence between constancy and chaos. Most of the time, though, the mistake we make is we contract it and we use less, which is why most of my work with vocal variety is coaching people to use more. So if you've ever heard the phrase slow down, the person is actually trying to tell you. They're trying to tell you, but they lack the vocabulary for this. They're trying to tell you, vary your pace. It shouldn't be slowed down, because if one just slowed down all the time, what you would get would be plodding, painstakingly slow speech. No, we talk faster at times, slower at times. And you can think about this with a really fun and intuitive criteria. We modulate our pace based on such obvious things if you think about it. 1, how long do you need to think of smart words? 2, how much time do you want to give your listener to digest the smart words that you said? And then 3, how long it takes to enunciate those words. Enunciation is not instant. It takes time to say the word time, because that M has to be sustained just a little bit for us to hear that you're saying the word time and not tight or tied. So this is where variety and pace comes from. Now, I hope that's not too much of a deep dive, but part of why I want to give that to people is I want them to begin to treat themselves with the sophistication that they're due. It's not enough to say slow down. Treat yourself like the remarkable communication instrument and miracle that you are, and recognize how sophisticated vocal variety is and how rigorous you can get with it. And now to answer your question about when should we do it, the amazing thing is that you really can just free yourself up to just play with it. Try it in different ways. Don't obsess about which words I should emphasize. Just use more vocal variety to experiment with it. And I'll give you a very concrete example. Actors study this. You can set a parenthetical. So that means a parenthetical phrase in a sentence. You can set a parenthetical apart from the rest of the sentence. And you can do it in any pitch pattern you want to. So I'm going to say a sentence 2 times, and I'll include some useful but not mandatory information in the parenthetical in the middle. Okay? So the sentence will be communication, and the parenthetical is, which is a physical art, is the subject of my professional life. Okay? That's the sentence. So the first time I'm going to do it low, high, low. And the second time I'll do it high, low, high. And I want you to notice how both ways the idea is clear. Okay? Here we go. Communication, which is a physical art, is the subject of my professional life. Now let's switch it. Communication, which is the subject. Oh, no, I forgot the script. Communication, which is a physical art, is the subject of my professional life. So the meaning that this middle idea is useful, valuable, but not mandatory is clear whether I go low, high, low, or high, low, high. So the call to action that I offer for people is just use more vocal variety and don't worry about it. Just expand your vocal palette and see what happens.
If somebody is in conversation, they listen to this and then they go away and then they vary in their vocal variety, but then they might think to themselves, this just doesn't feel natural to me.
Yeah.
And, I think you actually made this point in the book. What do you kind of say to people when they make that comment?
Yeah. Most of the time, and I mean like 95% of the time, they're confusing natural with habitual. So they say this doesn't feel natural, but it has nothing to do with natural. I'll give you an example. You know who has great vocal variety? Babies, kids, like incredible vocal variety. And that's because they need that vocal variety to communicate what they're trying to get from their parents. And they have not layered onto their life and their voice and their body all the tension and physical traps and holding that we do as they don't have tight jaws. They're not locking their jaw and grinding their teeth and things like that. They are open communication instruments. So what probably has happened is that people have accrued a whole bunch of habits that makes them much more constrained than they used to be. This is the classic kind of example that I typically see. It can be the other way too, by the way. Sometimes people almost are excessively amped up in certain situations, and they actually need to try to tack back to a more grounded, more leveled kind of energy. But most of the time, it's the other way. People have constrained themselves, and they actually have to use more vocal variety, more gestures, more enunciation. And the thing that I often do, which is a total trick, it's kind of cruel actually, because it uses people, it uses their assumptions against them, is I will have them talk and record it in a practice. So here, give me your elevator pitch and I'm going to film it. Okay. And then they do the thing. And then I pretend to press my stop button on my phone, but I don't. I keep it recording, but I hold it rather casually so they don't know it's still recording. And I say, hey, how was that for you? How was that experience? What'd you think? And what happens is magically they start talking like themselves. But it weirdly turns out that themselves uses a lot of vocal variety and much more dynamic enunciation and more gestures and actually better eye contact as they look at me to try to tell me how that felt for them. And then we watch the footage, the practice part, and then the part they did not know they were being filmed. So if someone says to me, this doesn't feel natural, often I will say, good. Because your natural might not actually be at all what you think it is. And you might be clinging to habit and habits that are actually limiting your life.
Right. When you said that, I thought to myself that me as a 25 handicap golfer, it didn't feel natural for me when I was getting lessons from a golf pro, that when I was learning about what to actually do, that didn't feel right. Which I imagine will probably be what people might experience if they do try these exercises, but that doesn't mean that they're not the right thing to do.
Well, and also, look, people, you're smart, you're sophisticated, you know your life and your circumstances. Not every exercise in this book is going to be equally powerful or profound for you. As an example, the finger walking activity, for about 75% of the people I work with, it's really powerful. But there's a significant minority that it ends up being a little bit too cognitively challenging. It's a useful exercise. It's a very interesting way to think about language, but it never actually breaks through to building muscle memory in a positive way to be more linguistically precise. That's okay. We don't go to the gym and do every single exercise in the gym every single day. Our bodies are different. We do different things, and we find some exercises that really work for us. So this book is full of, I think there's 18 or 20 kinesthetic tools in this book, maybe more, maybe 25. I should actually count back and see. I promise you, some will work better than others, but all of them will help you begin to develop an approach where you can actually build muscle memory to use your body as the communication instrument that it is, and get better quickly. I mean, weeks and months, not years.
A lot of people asked about nervousness, and they were things like, I'm in interviews, if I have to give a public speech that I hate giving, if I'm on a date, etc., etc. Now, we've already, suggested this shift about becoming more focused on the other than ourselves. Are there any kind of specific tools, ideas that you offer people if they're feeling really nervous in that moment to deal with that and to communicate effectively?
If you are pained by a lifelong journey around nerves and stage fright and fear of public speaking and these sorts of things, get this chapter. And I'm going to keep it free at don'tsayum.com because I want people to have this tool. And the reason is that whole kind of self-defeating cycle I talked about earlier, it is even more so true with nerves because people get terrible coaching and terrible advice. And I actually had this happen a week ago. I was having a conversation in a context with someone who should know much better. Okay. And they revealed to me that their advice for people who are struggling with nerves, like really paralyzed with nerves in a situation, is to tell them this sage piece of wisdom. You can hear my sarcasm, I think. The sage piece of wisdom is just have fun. Just have fun. Just have fun out there, okay? Now, this is so damaging because the person is not in any mind frame to have fun. None. And when they don't have fun, they think they have done something wrong. They think they have failed. And it only reinforces the sort of negative doom loop that they're in.
In interviews or when speaking, I think it's really easy if one thing goes badly, or that if we're so afraid of one thing going badly when we deliver, when we're speaking, when we're trying to communicate ideas, that it can be really hard to pick ourselves back up, or being so afraid of it can breed nervousness. So I'm just curious, do you try to help people flip their mindset on that if we do make a mistake, that we should almost just forget about it? How do you kind of approach that stuff?
One of the huge drivers of nerves and of anxiety and being preoccupied is, what if something goes wrong, right? What if I forget what I'm supposed to say? And you're exactly right that there's some very concrete things you can do to help. And I'll share these just sort of one after another. The first thing I really recommend is that you should replace the 3 F's you currently have in your head about what happens in those situations with 3 other F's. So right now, if you're in a highly adrenalized speaking situation and something goes wrong, the 3 F's you're probably thinking of are like fight, flight, or freeze. Our evolutionary threat response. They don't work for obvious reasons. You can't fight anybody. There's no one to fight. You can fly, you can leave the stage, right? But even more problematic, if you freeze, what happens is you stop breathing. Speaking is moving. We've been talking about that over and over. It's a physical activity. So if you freeze, everything gets worse because you're holding your breath. So instead of those 3 F's, the goal should be fake it, feature it, or fix it. Fake it means if no one knows and it's not messing you up, fine, fake it. You don't have to draw attention to every mistake you make in life. But if it's threatening to throw you off, you can do those 2 others. You can feature it, which means you actually make it a good thing, or you fix it. Fix it would say like, the slides aren't working right now, so let's just have a discussion. And if they come back online, we'll shift back to them. Or feature it. The slides aren't working right now. This is a great accident, actually, because we do need to talk today at some point about what do we do in case of technical glitches with the client. So in fact, maybe let's front load that conversation. Let's talk about that right now. If this happens with clients, what should we do? So you feature the thing as a positive. Now, to build on that, can I keep going, or am I?
Please. I love this stuff, man. I love it.
Okay. All right. I don't want you to be drinking out of I obviously get excited about this kind of stuff, but I also don't want to, throw you too many things at once. That's by itself hopefully interesting and kind of liberating and insightful, maybe even, but it's inadequate by itself because that is a mental framework. You have to actually make that physical. So in the book, and if people are watching this clip, you can see them quickly. I'll just hold them up. But in the book, we have these cards that you can cut out, and they are these cards that just have phrases on them, like fun phrases like, oh, I can't believe I forgot. I also want to say, or what does that mean? Or in other words, or let me clarify that, or let me go back a moment, or that's not what I meant. What I meant was. And I'll even stand up so you can see this for a second. I'll try to stay close to the microphone though, because I don't want to have you lose the audio. But I actually, coaching people, I will have them do an exercise where they stand on one leg. And this is called a mistake is not a mistake drill. And they stand on one leg, and then I gently push them on their shoulder. And when they put their foot down, they have to say out loud, a mistake is not a mistake. And they stand back on that one leg, and they continue sharing whatever content they're sharing, presentation, elevator pitch, speech, whatever it is. And I keep doing that over and over and over again as they're speaking. And when they put their foot down, they have to say, a mistake is not a mistake. And what happens very quickly is that they desensitize themselves to the catastrophe of a mistake, which is not a catastrophe. And then you take the cards, and instead of mistake is not a mistake, you have them draw these cards and say a phrase. So one time you shove them and they draw a card and they have to say, oh, I can't believe I forgot. I also want to say, and they have to find a way to adapt and keep going. And the next time you shove them and then they say, what does that mean? And they find a way to integrate. Now, listeners, take my word for this. The amazing thing about this is everybody's able to do it. They think they won't be able to do it. They're like, how can I integrate these phrases? And then you do it and they do it. In fact, it becomes a game almost. And this makes sense because we do this in life all the time when we're other focused. If you gave your friend a piece of advice and then you realize halfway through you gave them the wrong information, the wrong phone number, the wrong location, whatever it is, there's no part of you that would think, I've made a mistake. I'm a fraud. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that's catastrophe. You would just fix the thing, and you might even feature it. You might say, that's so funny. That's my old lawyer, friend, colleague, whoever. I can't believe I still have that phone number in my phone. No, that's the wrong one. Here's the right one. And you would never think twice about it. But when we get self-focused, we obsess about those mistakes. So fake it, feature it, fix it. And then I recommend, and in the book, you actually can, there's pages in which you can cut out cards like the ones I just talked about and just showed. You cut them out and you actually practice this mistake is not a mistake drill with these playing cards as reminders of these various phrases. And in fact, in the chapter, you even write your own transparency phrase, ones that are not even on the cards. It might be even more meaningful for you.
If people were interested in perhaps looking at someone, maybe they wanted to go to YouTube, and to actually see someone that you would point to as just an amazing communicator that seems to highlight so many of these things. Perhaps they can even go back to the Yang part 2. Is there anyone that you look at in the public sphere that you think kind of hits so many of these points?
Yeah, for sure. I won't direct you to Andrew Yang. That's not because I don't think he's a good communicator. I do, but he would do the same thing if he hears what I'm about to say. He would direct people in the same direction, which is go even a level above professional politicians and policymakers and philanthropists, which is Andrew is essentially now a philanthropist trying to help the world be a better place. Go the next level up and look at stand-up comics. Stand-up comedians are about as good as it gets when it comes to speaking, because they have learned how to use their voices and their whole communication instrument to surprise and delight brutal, ruthless audiences, and to do so and somehow make a living at this, and to do it night after night after night after night on the same material, and somehow bring that same material into the absolute present moment. And that's what brings us laughs, of course. So the generic answer is look at stand-up comics. Then, if you want to use an actual individual person, I really do think Martin Luther King is about as good as you get. And for a lot of reasons. First, his delivery. I mean, if you want to study the 5 P's of vocal variety, listen to Martin Luther King. It's astonishing. And you will be shocked at how far he goes with things. You know, I have a dream. Like, it's almost sung at points. And he built that over his life as He built that over his life as a religious professional, of course. But it gives you a indication of how far one could go. Quite far, in fact. But it doesn't just stop there. His content is masterful too. And he does something, the book is not about content, okay? So this is just my own reflections on it. But he does something incredible, which is he constantly speaks in really erudite, complex, impressive, accurate language. And then the very next sentence makes it deadly simple. 4 words long, 6 words long, and all monosyllables. So it's very elevated, very plain, complex, simple. And that back and forth is partly what makes the rhetoric so incredibly satisfying, because in its own way, it is surprise. I'm reading Moby Dick, by the way. I don't know if anyone's read that book recently, but Herman Melville does the same thing, by the way. So anyway, that's the communicator I would direct people to.
Amazing. And you and me, we're in different parts of the world. I'm in the UK, you're in America. I'm curious how accents, how they also influence, I guess, how people perceive, and also, I guess, how they influence our ability to be able to communicate effectively.
Yeah. I'll share 2 thoughts on that. The first is I work with lots and lots of people who have an accent, and I'm putting accent in quotes because an accent partly depends on where you are in the world at the time. The 2 countries with the most English speakers are China and India, by the way. So many of the people I work with who speak with an accent, these are startup founders. These are the PhD students at Columbia Business School that I taught. They are often speaking English as a second or a third or a fourth language. So if this happens to be you, if you don't speak your native language in your day-to-day in the business that you're doing, there's a very good chance that your language skills and your quote-unquote accent are fine. It's not a problem. The problem is enunciation. So if you're concerned about your accent, don't. Instead, just work on enunciation. Because the crucial thing is not, do you make an R sound differently than I do? Yes. The crucial thing is, can I understand you? And that is a function not so much of the sound changes that happen in a different accent, but is the person dynamically and adequately making the sounds they need to with their mouth to be understood, even if those sounds are different than what someone else might make. So that's just one thing I want to put out there for people in case they have any kind of like, ooh, my accent's a problem. Probably not a problem. It might be that your enunciation is a problem, though. And then the second thing about accent is a bit more of an anecdote. And I don't know if this will be interesting to your listeners and viewers, but I hope so, because it's interesting to me. I grew up in Colorado and in the United States of America. And in America, we thought of British English as the height of communication, the height of everything. And in fact, we would even think that if we hear someone speaking with a British accent, that they're smarter than we are automatically. So you can imagine my absolute shock when I grow up in life and begin to work as a communication expert and start getting hired by all of these British law firms to come and teach their lawyers and their professionals how to speak like an American. I was blown away by this, but this is the case. And this is the point that I want you to hang on to, which is there may be a chance in which you are speaking in a deeply minimized way in your life and it's shooting you in the foot and you don't even know it. So these lawyers who I have tended to coach, it's not that they don't have a commanding vocabulary, they do. And it's not that they don't have smart ideas, but what they have fallen into physically. And I'll try to do a bit of an impression now so that you can hear it, is that they move their way through their speech in a very halting and overly deliberate way, and they don't breathe, and they tiptoe up to each word almost in such a manner that they are afraid of the word itself, and this is the overall pattern that tends to define this pattern of communication. Now, please, everyone, I am in no way trying to ridicule. I am only trying to illustrate, because I think it's an important teachable moment. The thing that they are asking me to teach these British lawyers is not how to culturally be an American. What they're really trying to teach is stop doing glottal stops that prevent you from breathing, where you close your vocal cords and cut off your air. Start opening your mouth. Begin using your breath in a free enough way that you can fill the room with sound. Unleash the 5 Ps of vocal variety so that your audience can be surprised, be informed, be oriented, be emotionally invested, and use your communication instrument in the expansive ways it needs to be used in order to accomplish what you want in life. So it really has nothing to do with British and American. It does have to do with allowing yourself to speak as large of a version as you actually are. And there are a bunch of cliches about Americans, right? That we're like loud and big, open mouths and talk like that all the time. It's fine. It's good to make fun of us. Make fun of us too. Make fun of everybody, I guess, right? For all the sort of cliches and fun, not damaging stereotypes that we have about each other. But I think the lesson is an interesting one, which is it's not about their vocabulary. It's not about their subject matter expertise. They are not using their physical and vocal communication instrument in such a way to set them up for success.
Well, man, I think this has been so profound. I've learned so much. There are so many things that I'm going to take away, and I hope that our audience stay with us on this journey as I start incorporating many of these tips that I've learned. I'll certainly be trying them. Michael, where can they connect with you? Tell them where they can get the book, and anything at all that you want our guys to take away.
Sure. Don'tSayUm.com is the URL for the book. Don'tSayUm.com. LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me, Michael Chad Hoeppner at LinkedIn. And the company that I lead, I founded the company and I'm still the CEO, is gktraining.com. That's gktraining.com.
Amazing. And am I right in thinking that the book is a bestseller?
Yes, the book is out. The book is released. And in fact, we are number 9 currently on the USA Today bestseller list. So it is a national bestseller.
Well, congratulations. And we shall see after this podcast if we can get that book up a few places.
I appreciate that.
This was such a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure too. I must tell you that you read this book with far more attention and dedication to learning. And I could not be more impressed with the questions you asked. And I really just found the conversation delightful. So thank you. Not everybody who has podcasts, listeners, Joe's awesome. Okay. Because not everyone who has podcasts puts this much work into the subject matter that they're going to talk about. So thank you for taking it really so very seriously and dealing with it with the attention that I think the subject, communication, deserves.